So, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time today for being on our Community of Practice channel here on YouTube. And on behalf of SETSI, thank you so much for your leadership today.
Oh, Nishik, thank you.
Awesome. So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
So Kisha Lamonquang, Anishik Elmilian, Yunque Kishvik, Walk ni Chwakin, Walk Wulamelsa Walkin, Walk ni Wikion, Walk ni Njosek, Walk ni Wulamelsa Walkinen, ni Shinzi, Howe Shopako, ni Nonjiae Lapawi Lakawi, ni Nangwamawak Tekwa, ni Nzulanapawi. So I just wanted to follow your acknowledgement by an acknowledgement in my own language. I come from a Lapawi or Delaware Nation at Moravian Town. And what I talked about was that I acknowledged Creator, I acknowledged the waters and the medicines, I acknowledged the lands that we come from, and that I acknowledged gratitude for the day of the day and being able to breathe life. So I'm Turtle Clan, and I'm also the Indigenous Leadership Director for Carolinian Canada. And so some of my work centers around, we co-created a new blended finance mechanism called the Conservation Impact Bond. It's an award-winning pay-for-success model that brings together experts and leaders from different sectors to scale up impact investment for healthy landscapes and conservation. So it's a model rooted in two-eyed seeing, an ethical space that bridges First Nations, conservation organizations, public and private foundations, corporations, and academic institutions using blended finance to bring in new sources of funding. It uses impact and outcome metrics as key pillars of the funding structure. And because this model particularly is centered around conservation, it actually accelerates the work on the ground faster than traditional granting programs, bypassing a lot of barriers that those programs can have. It also works in tandem with the growing season, which is needed to kind of restore the landscapes on the ground. And so we fund Indigenous-led projects and restoration projects related to the environment. And we try to keep the metrics of this model really broad so that we were able to encapsulate different work and restoration and different ways of knowing and being on how to do that restoration. My work specifically focuses around the co-development of this model. So we are going into phase 3. And because I bring kind of, that Indigenous knowledge and leadership into it, it enables the model to really be balanced in two-eyed seeing, which is really, really important because a lot of the work that I do is relationship building with the 10 First Nations in Southern Ontario across the Carolinian zone. And so we work together as collaborators, as co-creators, building this model. And really, my work is to support their environmental initiatives on the ground, which on the back end, it looks like, taking a lot of barriers down, challenging a lot of methodologies and systemic approaches to create something new that's really going to center their leadership and the work that they do.
Powerful, powerful. That's awesome. And can you articulate your personal mission and vision and what inspires you about the work you do?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's really about supporting the Indigenous nations that I work with. Like that really pushes me every day to kind of get out of my bed and want to do it because at the end of the day, it's about the work on the land. I think that's probably my biggest inspiration is that, my own connection as an Indigenous woman, as a matriarch, a leader for my nation and, culturally knowledgeable, extremely culturally knowledgeable. It's about ways that I can use that knowledge to change things, to really make sure that the land is getting what it needs and upholding my responsibilities as an Indigenous woman. And so with Indigenous nations, stewarding some of the most protected tracts in the conservation, I mean, in the Carolinian zone, how can I do my part to support them and get them the funding and the resources and capacity building to do what they do best? And so, a lot of their work inspires me. They have, youth guardianship programs starting out. So that includes training, that includes cultural revitalization, cultural knowledge being passed around, and also being able to address the needs that their communities are identifying as stewards of the land, and creating ways to do that together, rooted in collaboration. Me also specifically, I really appreciate the fact that I get to use my creativity in thinking around different ways to do things and um, being able to put that into the conservation impact bond model to really make something new. Something that really hasn't been done before, especially when looking at, the conservation sector. A lot of them are still really stuck in traditional methods.
That is amazing. And what challenges or barriers have you faced, and how have you overcome them in your work?
I'm going to look at it firstly from the financial lens because this is a blended finance model focused on outcomes-based metrics for conservation. I think, and because it's one of the very few blended models like this in Canada, I think the public and private sectors have been slow to learn about how these funding structures work. That's been my experience. It's a very new concept to Canada in general. Um, I think there's only maybe 9 or 10 models in general in Canada today. It's still very new. But so I think right now, for those public and private sectors, it's it's a lot of education about learning how the outcomes of these projects work, learning how the funding structures work, learning about, as partners in these models, how they can come to the table and not only support the projects, but do it in a way that's creating more of a lasting impact rather than it being a transactional impact. Um, I also think too, it's around changing the understandings around not only is it, like I said, like funding these models, it's about the outcomes on the ground, right? Because these are outcome-based models. So these outcomes really support the needs of the communities that they're supporting. Like they're geared for that, right? And they're addressing some really critical barriers right now that traditional funding gaps don't address in federal provincial levels, especially conservation. It's one of the least funded um, areas right now. So I think to just to have spaces and platforms and opportunities to talk about why these models are so important um, is going to really help shift those conversations about risk as well. We hear a lot of conversation. I hear a lot of conversations on the other end about risk. And it's interesting to me because our model is based around conservation. So we're literally growing life, putting plants and trees into the ground to grow life, to build climate resilience. And because our model, specifically the conservation impact model, is focused around reconciliation and supporting Indigenous-led initiatives, um, with us being in a climate emergency and understanding that 80% of the world's biodiversity is protected by Indigenous peoples. I think at this point it's a risk not to be investing in Indigenous led projects like these, right? And that's kind of the beauty of the conservation impact bond, is that it gives these nations autonomy to lead their projects in the way they know how, with the outcomes being better, environmentally stronger outcomes. And I think that's kind of the key here, is that autonomy that those nations need. And really, at the end of the day, it's about building that climate resilience, especially when we're looking at climate change and really terrible climate impacts. So why wouldn't you be investing in biodiversity conservation and Indigenous-led projects.
That's right. It's collaboration, as I say, is key to social change and environmental change, and to really make that impact, because it's not even about us anymore. It's the generations onwards that we are leaving that positive legacy, that like I said, that outcome based structure, so that they can see, hey, we actually did something. We actually put seeds in the ground. We actually did this, and now we're going to carry it on for the greater good of the um, future generations. So
Yeah.
totally agree. Mhm. Awesome. So I think you touched on it already, but if you can just maybe reiterate any key priorities that you're working on currently.
Yes. So I feel like half of my other job is to assist and talk to investors and possible outcome payers to really, again, get them to understand the model, to support, fund our model. So right now, a lot of our key priorities are we're looking to scale. So our model is a place-based model right now in the Carolinian zone, and we'll be scaling for phase 3 of the conservation impact, the zone impact bond, across the Carolinian zone. So it's going to probably include a lot more habitat partners, hopefully all of the 10 First Nations in the area, as well as, landowners and stewards. So right now we're looking to scale that investment. The total portfolio, I think, is around 2 million. And we're looking at releasing the first tranche soon. We just need a little bit of a little bit more funding on the back end. So we're working on that piece right now, as well as some other key priorities is really to finish shaping the model. We're almost done with some of the governance pieces. We're finalizing those right now, and then they'll go through another evolution using some new methods that I want to implement to really center it and evolve it into a more rooted two-eyed seeing model. So there's a lot of learning, even in the research part of it. We work very closely with Western University's Business Ivy School, and they work a lot on the um, evaluation model, and which features the metrics. And so all of those metrics will be evolving and growing with this model. So we've got a couple priorities lined up around all of that, but it's a busy time. But this development process, I think, is my favorite, because it's a chance for our team and all of the collaborators and co-creators in this model to really dream up something new that, like I said, challenges the norm of what everyone does. It breaks those barriers down and centers collaboration. So I kind of like that.
Totally, totally. That's awesome. So let me ask you, how do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada?
It actually inspires me a lot. The social impact spaces, to be honest, every time, we get to go to a conference, it's one of my favorite spaces to be around, because I get to see so many new models and innovation finding ways to fund some of the most important work our communities need, whether that's medical, social, environmental. Like it's limitless on the ways I see these models coming together for housing and all sorts of issues that, like I said, sometimes don't traditionally get enough funding. So to see so many collaborators in a room really want to come together instead of um, in a scarcity mindset, but pooling resources for the outcomes of these communities. Like I really love that, especially for some of the grassroots initiatives that I'm seeing using these models. They create, like I said, they create stronger outcomes, and um, to see some of the leaders leading this work, it's really inspiring. I love it. So I have a lot of hope for the sector. I have a lot of hope that like I said, this educational piece isn't going to be it's not going to be a growing pain for much longer, because even some of the more traditional conferences I've gone to, they're bringing in panels talking about this. They're showcasing models with this now, and it's starting to become a much bigger conversation in Canada. because the United States is leading a lot of these models. They're supported by policy. The UK is leading these models, who are also supported by policy. Canada doesn't currently have any policy supporting outcomes-based or blended finance models right now, but it's going to come, right? So I see a lot of hope, and I'm very, very inspired by this sector.
Right. I agree. I'm hopeful. I'm definitely hopeful. And it's definitely an exciting space too. Every time we have meetings with Victor and the different organizations that come together, like he was telling you about the Solidarity Working Group, you'll love that. If you love those spaces, then we'll definitely, when the one comes up in February, we'll definitely have you there to spotlight. So um, totally agree. All right. So what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you?
So I think for this, I'm going to look at the Indigenous nations and colleagues that I work with first, because I kind of play bridge building mostly. I come from the Indigenous communities. I work with the Indigenous communities, but then on the other side, I work with the very traditional conservation community. I work with investors and finance in those communities. I work with researchers in those communities, and sometimes a lot of those spaces aren't as diverse, and that's okay. But I always, I'm because I come from community, my thinking and all of the work that I do centers that community, especially the land that those communities are from, especially my own territory. And so I think for me, for success is really just looking at the gifts that I carry as a leader to amplify the work that they're already doing. Like I I just want to be able to use those gifts to support them, and do it in a way that suits their needs and their timelines, right? So it's a lot of trust building, um, because the optics of me working for a settler organization, and even though Carolinian Canada does have, we have an Indigenous arm of the organization now, it's still important to recognize that, right? So to make sure that we're doing the work with care, with that intentionality to make sure that it's rooted in reciprocity and accountability. And so having, really core fundamental values like that and leading with that integrity is some of the pillars of the Indigenous leadership pillar. So um, I think that's really important for me. And so the goals would be, I think, even from a community perspective, to see the communities here being able to flourish, to see the next generation of youth step up and be able to take on their role as Indigenous stewards, to really revitalize the cultural practices that are so tied to the land and understand why they're doing it. And also bring in that language piece, because you kind of, you need that language piece to understand where you're coming from and why you're doing it and the connections you have to the land, right? We're intricately connected and we can't have one without the other. So for me, it's to be able to see that flourishing. And right now, a lot of the needs that and gaps that I see is, lack of funding, lack of capacity to participate, not enough training, right? So how can I use my gifts and the collaborators around the table to support those nations in the ways that they need and really see it thrive, not just um, be able to grow, but to really thrive and then become, truly independent.
Yes, amen with that for sure. That would be a beautiful success model, especially when you touch on the youth and their language and their identity. I mean, definitely this is to me the age of accountability. You touched on accountability. I'm all for that. I think
Yes.
this is the era of it,
Yeah.
the revealing, the in your face, but we need that. We need that in order
Yeah.
to heal and to move on and to have results and positive outcomes into future generations. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So this has been a very impactful, very important, and inspiring interview. My last question for you is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to actions at this time?
I think one thing, one thought that I had is, a lot of people, when they're trying to work with Indigenous communities, because I see that a lot of well-meaning organizations and funders, they really want to be able to support, reconciliation on the ground. But I feel like reconciliation is such a broad term. It's such a used term. So what does that really mean in practice? And I think if you don't do it with intentionality and you don't really deconstruct and decolonize the way you do things, you approach things, you can cause harm. And sometimes, I see those challenges, or I've heard stories about those challenges with other organizations. But I mean, if I could give kind of one message on how Carolinian Canada did it, it's really letting those nations lead and going at the speed of trust, like you said, accountability and listening. You need to listen to what they're saying, to really understand how you can meet them where they're at, right? I think that's the key, is where are they at and where are they asking you to help them? Because they should be leading the work, right? So that's reconciliation in practice. And so I think that's just, one small call to action. The other one that I gotta kind of plug is, like I said, we are looking to scale our model. And so if anybody out there listening wants to know more about the Conservation Impact Bond, wants to have a presentation, is interested in being an investor and funder and supporting, the Indigenous-led initiatives on the ground, supporting the habitat projects on the ground, in a really meaningful way, a different way, please get a hold of us at cib@carolinian.org.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I know people will definitely contact you. It's very important. It's as I say, it's like a no-brainer, a seed that you plant today, you will reap tomorrow. And, we should all be grateful for all of the elements, for even having us exist, in this day and time, in this body, so we appreciate you, Sam. We appreciate all that you do. We can wish you continued success and much prayers and much health and wealth to you. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Awesome. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. And Sam, could you please reiterate what you said earlier, the opening? Could you close us with that? That'd be amazing.
Sure. So Kishalamonkwang, Anishik Elamilion Yunque Kishklik, Wak Wulamousawak, Wak Ni Wikion, Wak Ni Unjosek, Wak Mulamousawakanen, Anishik. So Creator, thank you for giving me this day. Thank you for blessing the waters. Thank you for acknowledging our Mother Earth. Thank you for acknowledging the medicines. And I'm grateful. Anishik, thank you.
Shit, thank you so much. Thank you. So Sam will be in touch. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.